Hello and welcome to GCSE Infection and Response Part 2 with Mrs Castanera. We are currently on Lesson 8. How do the body and the immune system defend against pathogens? Our keywords are non-specific defence, immune, antitoxins, antibodies and antigen. So if we could start the lesson by having a go at the knowledge check questions, please. If you could pause the video whilst you do that. So let's review the answers to those questions. Question 1. What type of cells are fungi? So fungi are eukaryotes. Okay, so they are the more complex type of cells. Question 2. State why bacteria is prokaryotic. Well, that's because it has no nucleus. Its DNA simply floats around in the cytoplasm. Question 3. Identify a symptom of rose black spot. Well, a typical symptom is black or purple spots on the leaves. Question 4. Define the term health. So health is a state of physical and mental well-being. Question 5. Define the term unicellular. Unicellular means it is made up of a single cell or a one-cell organism. Question 6. Define the term vector. The vector is an organism that transmits a pathogen. Question 7. Identify where mosquitoes breed. So they breed in stagnant water. Question 8. Define the term CHD. So that's coronary heart disease. Now please give yourself a mark out of 8, making sure that you've ticked to show where you were correct, crossed where you haven't answered or have got the answer wrong, and written your corrections in that alternative colour of ink. So if you have got 4 or less, then you need to review the previous lessons because you should know many of these by now. If you have got 7 or more, then you're doing exceptionally well. Well done. So today's lesson, we are going to, at the end of the lesson, be able to explain how the body defends against pathogens using our non-specific defence systems. And we're going to assess the role of the immune system in specific defence against pathogens. And by non-specific, we mean just a generalised, and by specific, we mean something that is targeted at a particular thing. So we're going to move on to our first line of defence. That's defence against pathogens or disease-causing microbes. So for pathogens to have an effect on an organism, they have to enter the organism. Okay, and that's the main thing that we're trying to protect against. So humans have several features of defence that prevent entry, and these are non-specific defence mechanisms. So rather than carry on with this list, what we're going to do is I have got a diagram here showing the human body and all the different methods of defence that prevent the entry of pathogens into the body. So I'm just going to zoom in. Ideally, I would like you to draw the diagram of the body and label each of these parts. So here's the diagram. If you could draw the diagram of the body, pause the video if you need to, and then we're going to label each of these points and I will zoom in whilst you do that. So let's go through those. So the skin is a barrier and it produces microbial substances to kill the pathogens. So we're starting just here. Then we have the nasal cavity. So the nasal cavity has hairs and mucus which traps the particles and microorganisms and pathogens. Then we have the eyes. The eyes are cleansed by tears, which also contain a chemical that inhibits bacterial growth. That means it stops bacteria growing. The ear produces cerumen, also known as earwax, which again inhibits or prevents bacterial growth. It reduces it. The mouth cavity, so we have mucous membrane traps, which trap microorganisms, and the mouth is also cleaned by saliva. And then we have the trachea and the bronchi, which is your breathing apparatus, and the mucus layer traps the microorganisms again. So pause the video if you need to write any of those down, and then we'll move on. Okay, so continuing on, we have the stomach, where acidic juices, so your stomach acid, will kill many microorganisms, not just the bad pathogens, but also some good microorganisms. Then we have the vagina, which secretes a mild acid, which inhibits the growth of pathogens. And we have the anus, which has mucous membranes which trap microorganisms, as well as the urethra, which has urine flowing through it when it's open, which prevents bacterial growth. So all of these different parts work together to defend each of the different openings of the body from microbes and pathogens entering them. So if you need to write any of those down, still pause the video whilst you do that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to just write a little annotation to say, see labelled diagram on student notes page. And the notes page is page 19. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you've done that on the notes page or if you've done it in a workbook, as long as you keep that together with the work you've done this lesson, that would be wonderful. So our next task is to move on to watching this video of the immune system. So if you pause this video and then go watch that one in another tab, and then come back to the lesson once you have done that. Okay, so when pathogens circumnavigate your first line of defence, by this we mean they get around it, they bypass. Okay, so that's what that word means. So when the pathogens bypass or get around our first line of defence, this is when a specific immune response is produced. Okay, so that is our immune system. Okay, so our immune system is a network of cells, tissues, and organs that work together to defend the body against attacks by foreign invaders. And when we say foreign, we mean things that are not your body. So foreign meaning not recognised as part of your body. So the most important part is your white blood cells, okay, and they're found all around your body and they patrol in case of infection, okay, and they go around in the blood. And when a white blood cell discovers a pathogen, there are 3 forms of defence. Okay, so first of all, something called phagocytosis, which is when a type of blood cell called a phagocyte engulfs, essentially it eats the pathogen or foreign cell and digests it. So here's our pathogen, and pathogen is eaten. So remember, a pathogen is a foreign cell or an illness or disease causing microbe. Okay, so here we have our pathogen being eaten and digested by the phagocyte white cell. And so we should probably say it's a white blood cell, in fact. Okay, moving on. Make sure you're writing these notes, please. Part 2. So next option for a defence is producing antitoxins. So these antitoxins, as we've already discovered, pathogens emit toxins. They either produce the toxins on their surface and release them, or they produce the toxins, and those toxins are released when the bacteria is destroyed by the body. So these antitoxins are designed to stop that toxic reaction. They prevent reaction to the toxins, which are from bacterial pathogens. So not from, but from bacterial pathogens. And the third option is by producing antibodies. Now, I'm sure you've heard about antibodies. So the antibody, well, we'll talk about that in a sec. Every pathogen or foreign cell has a marker on it which identifies it. So they have these markers that identify them. And this is called an antigen. And so when a white blood cell, a different type this time called a leukocyte, identifies a foreign antigen, it produces and secretes an antibody. So the white cell identifies the foreign antigen, and then it produces and secretes the antibody specific to that antigen, that foreign pathogen. And so these antibodies are really specific. That means they'll only work for one type of pathogen. There we go. So it's specific and only binds to one antigen. Okay, and that one antigen is only found on one type of pathogen. These antibodies allow for something called coagulation, which means clumping together, okay, of the pathogens for easier phagocytosis. So basically, it goes round marking up the foreign cells, labelling them with the antibodies, so those antibodies then clump together with their foreign invading pathogens. So they're all squashed together, herded together in a little group, and then the phagocytes come along and eat them. So antibodies are produced in one place, but they're carried around the body in search of identical pathogens. Okay, so where are they produced? Well, they are produced in the spleen usually. Okay, but they're carried around the body by the blood, or in the blood, and they're looking for those identical pathogens. So essentially this production of antibodies feeds back in to the pathogens being eaten. So this labels pathogens, which makes it easier for the pathogen to be digested and eaten. Right, so immunity remembered. And what we're talking about here is once your body has made these antibodies, it keeps a memory of them. There are special cells that help us to keep this memory, okay? And in fact, they're called memory cells. And so the idea is that if the same pathogen infects your body again, then these memory cells appear. And the memory cells go, hang on, I know what this is. I recognise this pathogen. And the same antibodies get produced, but much quicker this time. So you never actually feel ill, which is a brilliant evolution. So the body has produced pathogens, it keeps a memory of them. Okay, and these are called memory cells. Not like the memory in your brain. They're actually little cells that, again, tend to live in the spleen. They live in other places too, but also mainly the spleen and one of our organs. And again, if that same pathogen infects you again, it notices, okay, and the memory is invoked and the same antibodies are produced, and that way you get a quicker immune response and you don't get ill. That is brilliant. This is also how vaccinations work. So vaccinations are very clever. They make your body produce these antibodies, and so that it's going to make memory cells, and so that if you ever did get the actual infection, the actual illness, then you won't get ill, your body will fight them for you. And that is really clever how that works. So what you now need to do is you need to watch this video here on YouTube and draw a flow diagram of antibody production on your student notes page or in your notepad, wherever. Okay? So if you pause the video whilst you do that, please. Okay, so our next activity is I'd like you to complete this table with the definitions of the key words. Some of them can be found after this lesson or other lessons, and some of them are described in the text for this lesson. So I want you to go through and do this for yourself, please, and pause the video whilst you do that. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next task, checkpoint. A student reads that a link exists between a person's white blood cell count and their risk of developing a communicable disease. Explain why this statement is true for 6 marks. So this is a very tricky question, but it's really important that we have a go at these difficult questions. And there are 6 marks available, but even if you feel like you don't know very much, you can still write down what you do know about white blood cell counts and how they relate to diseases. And you will get some of these marks if you do that. Okay, so pause the video whilst you have a go at this. Try and write 6 separate points about this, because each point is worth a mark, and then we will mark it together afterwards. Okay, let's go through that. So, there are a number of ways to get marks here. So the first mark is to say that the white blood cells destroy the pathogens or the bacteria or the viruses. So I did that the white blood cells damage or destroy these pathogens. And another mark is available for saying that if you have less white blood cells, then you're going to be destroying fewer pathogens and you're going to be more likely to be infected. So even if you just said less white blood cells means you've got less able to destroy pathogens, that would be given, that's enough for the mark. Or if you said that less white blood cells means you're more likely to have an infection, that's also worth a mark. So each of those for 1 mark. Then 4 marks are available for talking about how white blood cells defend the body. And so you can have 1 mark for saying that they engulf, ingest, eat the microorganisms or the bacteria or viruses. You can have another mark for saying that antibodies are made for the particular pathogen. So antibodies are produced to destroy them. So the idea that you need antibodies to destroy the pathogen. Then another mark for saying that these antibodies stay in the body, or the memory cells stay in the body. Anything about the body having a remembering the pathogen or remembering the bacteria, and that makes you immune. And then another mark for saying that each individual pathogen or individual bacteria or virus or whatever it is needs a very specific antibody. So the idea that antibodies only work for one type of pathogen. And then your next mark is the idea that the body can produce antitoxins. So anything around antitoxins would give you a mark. And the final point available is that the antitoxins, they counteract the pathogens, the toxins released by the pathogens. So something to say that they cancel out the pathogens' toxins, or they neutralise the effect of the toxins released by the pathogens. So you can have any 4 from this second list. So you can get up to 2 marks for this section and up to 4 marks out of the 6 for this section. And your total available is 6 marks. So if you give yourself a mark out of 6 for that, if you have got 2 or more, then well done. You have tried, you've had a good go, and I'm really pleased that you attempted it. If you've got 4 or more, then you've done exceptionally well. Well done. So your final task is to attempt the knowledge check. I would like you to do questions 1 to 8. Don't worry about questions 9 and 10. So questions 1 to 8 of the knowledge check, please. So if you pause the video whilst you do that. Okay, so let's go through that. Question 1, state the main task of the first line of defence. So the first line of defence, the main task is to keep pathogens out of the body. Question 2, identify the function of mucus. So the mucus is there to trap the pathogens. And by trapping them, it prevents them from getting into the body. Question 3, state the function of white blood cells. Well, they fight off the pathogens. Question 4, explain what a toxin does to your body. It poisons the cells. And it damages tissue. So half of that would have been enough for the mark. Just poisons the cells or damages the tissues. So question 5, identify what cell produces an antigen. So it's the white blood cells, in particular leukocytes. Question 6, state what the function of an antibody is. So the function of an antibody is to bind to an antigen on the pathogen and then coagulate them or collect them together ready to be eaten in phagocytosis. If you've written something as simple as to bind to pathogens, that would be enough to get you the mark. In particular, they bind to the antigens. Question 7. State how protists infect an organism. Okay, so they have via vectors. Their transmission is via vectors. And remember that vectors are a separate organism that transmits the virus or illness, transmits the protist without being infected itself. And question 8, state the 3 types of blood vessel. That would be the arteries, veins, and capillaries. So if you give yourself a mark out of 8, make sure you've ticked each of the ones you got correct, crossed it if you didn't write an answer or if you got the answer wrong, and then write in your corrections, please. Okay, so if you've got 3 or less, then you need to have another look at this lesson. Okay, if you've got 6 or more, then you've done exceptionally well. Well done. And that's the end of our lesson. Thank you very much.